Carnage officially attains godhood. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back with the Carnage run. And for those of you guys who need a little bit of a refresher here, the long and short is that between the Venom comics and the Carnage comics, it seems like there's two Carnages running around. There's only one, and the really cool thing about this is it segues into a 4-part miniseries called Symbiote Necrosis, which we will cover, and it basically ties all these plot threads together and resolves everything, which thank God. So the thing about this is that Flash Thompson, ANTI-VENOM, is hot on the trail of Carnage. And the reason for that is because over the course of Carnage's story up to this point, he's been traveling across the multiverse, killing different iterations of Venom, and then taking their powers. And so as it stands right now, he's immune to fire, electricity, all the normal weaknesses that symbiotes have. The only thing he is not immune to is the power of ANTI-VENOM. Now, the nature of ANTI-VENOM, as most of you guys may or may not know, is that it basically is an overriding factor for any symbiote. In fact, there was a point in Marvel Comics when ANTI-VENOM first emerged that it tried to cure Peter Parker of his radioactive blood and take his powers away. And it almost worked. It was a really, really cool story. We have a playlist full of Spider-Man stuff. If you want to check it out, we'll have a link at the end of the video. But Flash Thompson is hot on the trail of Carnage because when Carnage was finished with the multiverse, he ended up realizing he wasn't really a god because he didn't really have a following. So he came back to Earth and then started massacring people, all based on the names of apostles. And so with Flash Thompson figuring out what it was that Carnage was doing, he was trying to track him down. Venom is off doing his own thing. He's outside of all of space and time right now, and we'll talk about that once we get to Symbiote Necrosis. But when this guy that Carnage has just killed is discovered by Eddie, Eddie comes out and then meets with Carnage, and the two of them don't immediately have a fight. Instead, what you get is this really cool thing, because Carnage right now is almost more philosophical than he is hyper-violent. And in fact, one of the things he tells Flash is he says, would it make you feel better if you knew that that guy that I just killed did some really nasty things? He was clergy after all. I'm sure we could come up with some plausible backstory that would make your actions less appalling. But for the most part, he just kind of toys with Flash Thompson here, because he knows that Flash is hot on the trail, but Flash Thompson is no Eddie Brock in the mind of Cletus Cassidy, right, in the mind of Carnage. And Carnage is trying to find Venom. That's what he's been doing this whole time, killing these different iterations of Venom across the multiverse. He's trying to find the main Marvel Universe Eddie Brock, but has no real idea where he is. But even Flash Thompson is knowledgeable enough about the nature of Carnage that he doesn't just do things indiscriminately. He used to back when he first showed up, right? Maximum Carnage and the stories that predated that, and him writing Carnage rules and blood on the wall and so on and so forth. But he knows that this is going towards something bigger. And so when he asks him, what are you doing? Carnage responds with this really, really interesting thing. He says, don't ask a clown why he's acting like a clown. Ask yourself why you're at the circus. And it's just this amazing response, right? Because it's kind of like, you're in the madhouse, so why are you asking questions about why the madhouse is being a madhouse? The question you need to ask yourself is, why are you in the madhouse in the first place? And so it's kind of interesting because Carnage almost kind of lords the idea of going after more people over Flash Thompson's head, right? He says, not yet, Flashy, if you lose your temper, I'm going to have to punish the fine people of Meadow Road. And listen, are those not the dulcet tones of the boys in blue? Of course, Carnage had basically called the cops, but he did this because he had basically planted evidence and done things in such a way to where when Flash Thompson runs up on the cops and says, oh my God, there's this Carnage symbiote, right? He, took out this guy, blew him up, all that kind of stuff. The cops are going to start asking him questions that he's either not going to be able to answer, or he's going to be able to answer in a fairly shady way because he can't tell them everything he's doing. And so that's going to lead to them investigating Flash Thompson. And then when they do, they're going to find some incriminating evidence in his house that Carnage left behind. I know it sounds kind of formulaic and sort of basic, but when you look at Carnage as a character in Marvel Comics, in the sense that he quite literally lives up to his namesake 9 times out of 10. Chaos, madness, no real plan, right? The Joker from The Dark Knight, just a dog chasing cars. He wouldn't know what to do if he caught one. That when you suddenly have a Carnage that is now methodical and it's planning, it's actually more terrifying than a Carnage who's just running around and indiscriminately taking people out. And so what you get is him kind of playing mind games with Flash Thompson to a degree, because when Flash asks the question, is this some kind of game to you? Carnage responds and he says, you know it is. Everything is. Maybe you should ask yourself the same thing, as in, what is this to you? And he says, tell me something. If you want to be a hero, why are you not at a hospital somewhere healing kids with cancer or whatever? Isn't that your true superpower? Healing people. So why don't you? Scared of pissing off Big Pharma, or do you not like being around all those sicky sickos? And so where Flash asks what it is that he's getting at, he says, my point is that we are alike, both killers for one, and there's another thing. Tell me, are you alive? And where Flash is like, what are you talking about? He says, are you alive? Like you as a person. I mean, Flash Thompson is dead and buried. So what are you? A reconstruction made by your symbiote friend? And if so, one might wonder if the symbiote could make you into whatever it wanted, why would it make you so pathetic? Why wouldn't it remove those memories that torture you? All the memories of all the things that you've done and all the things that you didn't do. Why wouldn't it take away your bloodlust, make you charitable and good instead of lazy and unlovable, give you your legs back for good? Why would it choose to recreate you with all your obvious flaws? Why wouldn't it make you whole again? Now here's what Cletus is talking about. For those of you guys who haven't necessarily followed the story of Flash Thompson was brought back by ANTI-VENOM, right? During the events of the King in Black, right? When Noel the symbiote god showed up on Earth and had the Celestials in tow and basically conquered the entirety of the Earth for a brief period of time. When Eddie Brock was going through his whole adventure and becoming, this godly type being with the unipower and so on and so forth, Flash Thompson had been dead for quite some time. Flash Thompson simply existed as a codex, which is kind of a memory fragment, so to speak, that belongs to a person who at one point was in possession of a symbiote. Ultimately, that codex came out into the real world, so it was like bringing a memory to life. And so it was a way for Marvel to essentially resurrect Flash Thompson, but the actual Flash is dead and in the ground. If Flash Thompson were to go to a graveyard right now where his body's buried and he dug it up, he would see a corpse in the box. So it's one of these things where it's really Cletus asking, like, are you actually real? Because if you're not real, then why does it matter anything that you do? But it's also calling the nature of him as a superhero into question, right? You have all these abilities. You have the power to basically cleanse people of any illness. You could walk into a cancer ward right now and cure every single person who's there. But instead, you're chasing me down. So how much of a superhero could you really be? And it is a great philosophical question, right? Superheroes chase down supervillains. It's just kind of the nature of comic books. But how much good could they be doing if they diverted their efforts to other things? But then it becomes an issue of collateral damage, right? If Flash Thompson goes into a hospital and he cures 50 people, how many people could Carnage kill during that time period? 200? 300? So is it like a net gain or a net loss? So there's a lot of philosophical discussion going on here. But one of the things that Carnage does is he sort of messes with Flash Thompson. He's wearing this name tag on his chest, right? The Rose Manor Wellness Center, which is where Flash Thompson's ailing mother is residing. And then when he starts to put two and two together, he realizes Carnage went to go and see his mom. So he immediately travels there. And when he gets there, she's essentially dying. Now, as ANTI-VENOM, he can inherently sense any illness inside of a person and then cure them of virtually any illness. Whether or not cancer actually falls into that, I'm not entirely sure. If you base things off the death of Captain Marvel, the original Marvel from Marvel Comics, which was written by Jim Starlin, cancer is like the one illness in the Marvel Universe that nobody can cure, right? Hence the reason why Marvel couldn't be saved. But the nature of ANTI-VENOM seems to be that he can potentially override that. We don't definitively know as far as I'm aware, although I could be wrong. If I am, feel free to mention it in the comments. I know you will do it anyway. So once Flash Thompson shows up here and he senses there's a kind of radiation inside of his mom, he basically starts going through and then of course cures her of this radiation for the most part. But the big question he has here is, how in the world did Carnage even find his mom in the first place? And what's even the motivation here? Is it simply just to send him over there so Carnage can kill a bunch of people over here? And seemingly, that's the case, because what happens is Carnage shows up at the Rose Manor Wellness Center, where this doctor is coming out, and yet again, breaking out this kind of philosophical thing, he asks her, he says, "Tell me something, doctor, I've always wondered this. You take the Hippocratical Oath, right?" And she's like, "Well, I mean, it's the Hippocratic Oath," and he says, "Sure, you take the oath and swear to avoid those twin traps of over-treatment and therapeutic nihilism, and to prevent disease whenever you can, blah, blah, blah." But then he says, when the test results come back positive for something horrible, is there a small part of you that feels excited? Like, sure, it's cancer, but also, yay, that's the remodel of the beach house. Sure, this person has some kind of debilitating illness, but think of the money that I will make in curing them. And I wouldn't go so far as to say that every doctor out there gets into the profession for the sole purpose of making money. Lord knows there's easier ways to do it. Outside of being on call, 15 hours a day or however it is that life works for doctors. But there is something to the idea of this desire that, like, yes, this person has a terrible illness and I'm going to make a whole bunch of money curing them, right? Like, is there that darker part of them, that darker side? And so where she initially rejects it and says, no, like, this is private property, you need to leave. The response of Carnage is, I need you, doctor. I need you to scream. And so where Flash Thompson is able to heal his mother, once that's done and he gets back out and Carnage literally has this woman dangling over a building, just ready to take her out. Of course, Flash Thompson jumps in, but after curing his mother, it's weakened him. And this is where the grand scheme of Cletus Cassidy comes into play, because what we find out here is that when he was going through the multiverse and he was taking out all these variants of Venom and then stealing their power, which basically made him immune to those different things, because he wasn't able to find a Flash Thompson or an anti-Venom, this is where he finds one. And so what he reveals here is he says, I have been thinking about godliness lately. One might wonder if Carnage has a place in the hearts of men, but the thing is, I'm already there. And while a fight breaks out between the two of them, when Flash Thompson says, what are you doing? Why are you not fighting? Carnage responds in saying, don't you see? Anti-Venom is one of the few things that can still hurt me, but I am evolving. I am on a journey to become something new. And where a cop shows up out of nowhere, of course, basically Carnage just literally tears this guy to pieces. And he says, with every bite of yours, your anti-venom grows less effective. I'm building up my tolerance. It is becoming part of me. In a few days, I will absorb you and it will hurt me no more. So literally, he's becoming immune to seemingly the one last thing that he needs to be immune to in order to basically overpower and defeat Eddie Brock and become the King in Black, because that's what Carnage is looking to do. Keep in mind, for those of you guys that never read the original King in Black story or any of the Venom stuff that came after, a King in Black is basically a person who can control every symbiote in existence. So imagine if Carnage had total control over every symbiote that existed out there in the universe. Imagine how quickly he would bring pandemonium and chaos to everything that's out there. It is almost a guaranteed way to conquer all of reality, because with all the different stories that we've seen, what's the common theme there? If you control the symbiotes, you control existence, because all it took in an alternate reality was for the deaths of all the superheroes and then to turn around and use symbiotes to create new Avengers, duplicates of the Avengers that we'd always known, that just follow the direction of the person who controlled them. So it's not difficult, because we've seen over time, symbiotes are almost impossible to destroy. And because there's so many of them, it would just turn into a war of attrition. And so you do get a bit of a fight here between Flash Thompson and Carnage, but fighting anti-venom is not the goal of Carnage here. Remember, all symbiotes are connected to one another. Carnage is kind of the exception, right? He's sort of out there doing his own thing. But what he does is that in fighting against Flash Thompson, he scans the memories of the symbiote itself, and in doing so, he realizes where the Venom symbiote is at. The kicker to this is the Venom symbiote is attached to Dylan, because again, referencing the Venom comics, one of the things that Eddie Brock did in order to keep his son safe is that when he became the King in Black, he took off into the universe. He made the Venom symbiote stay behind and bond itself to his son Dylan in order to keep Dylan protected. But Dylan is the way to gain access to where Eddie Brock is directly, because the Venom symbiote knows everything Eddie Brock knows. So all Carnage has to do is get a hold of the symbiote, scan its thoughts, and it says, Eddie's over there. He's immediately where Eddie is, and the fight ensues. You guys can see, based on our coverage of the last Venom comic, how it was that we seem to have Carnage here, but at the same time, Carnage where Eddie was, because this is the prequel to that appearance in Venom. So it's a cool thing, right? It's a pretty dope instance the way that it unfolds. But once he gets the information that he needs, Flash realizes what's happening, really too little, too late. That Carnage says Venom is with Dylan, Eddie let Venom bond with his son, that guy is a fool. But once Flash figures it out, it doesn't matter, because when he goes to attack Carnage, Carnage immediately harnesses Dark Force energy and whisks Flash Thompson away to basically this dimension of pure and total darkness. With Flash out of the way, then he can set his sights directly on Dylan, tracking him down, killing him, taking his symbiote, and going after Eddie. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. We will cover symbiote necrosis. Do not worry, because I know a lot of you guys who love Venom and Carnage are excited to see what happens. It's amazing. But make sure you guys click this link to the playlist if you need to get caught up on everything, and I will catch you all later. Peace.